Today we are going to be looking at a fascinating game between Garcia and Gligoric. Have you ever seen a Grandmaster game where there is a winner and there are no captures, no trades, no checks, no nothing, and it's a decisive game? I bet you haven't. I haven't. Usually you see a bunch of trades and a draw, an indecisive game and a bunch of pieces off the board. Here it's no pieces off the board in a decisive game. What could be better? So it's going to be a very positional game, very clogged up because all of the pieces are on the board. Now, Garcia was rated 2,400. Gligoric at his peak was 2,600 FIDE. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. He's created Theory in the King's Indian and many openings like that. He's beaten Fischer. He's beaten Spassky. He's beaten Petrosian. He's beaten Tal. He was very good. The reason I know him is because he was Serbian. He was very famous over there. He started playing chess when he was 11 years old. World War II kind of paused his progress, but once they figured out how good he was at chess, he kind of got let off the hook from war because he was so good at chess. It was one of those games. It was a crazy game back in the day. And he was very poor. His first chess set he actually made by carving out wine corks. And then he became an international master very quickly and then a grandmaster. So yeah, the age of chess has changed. But much respect to him. Definitely the most famous chess player in Serbia in history. He was very, very good. So we're going to get into the game. It begins with e4, e5. He is playing black against Garcia. And we get a Spanish. Okay, a6. Which line does Garcia play? Does he take? Probably not, right? Because we discussed that there are no captures this game. So bishop a4, knight f6, aiming at the pawn. However, those pawns are typically poisonous when the kings are in the center. So don't take them. You will run into trouble. Rook to e1, pawn to b5, kicking the bishop out. And now pawn to d6. Pawn to d6 stabilizes your pawn chain, right? You're probably going to attack on the king side because that's the way the pawn chain is facing. Good rule of thumb. Maybe the bishop will come to g4, pinning the knight. Maybe it'll come somewhere else on that diagonal. A lot of maybes thus far. There's a billion ways to play this position. Okay, sometimes we get d3, c3, and white is slow for d4. But when you get an earlier c3, they want an earlier d4. That's how I would view that move. We looked over the Fischer game kind of in this position where the queen went to f6 as black, and that didn't fare out too well for him. So castles, now both sides are castled. White needs to develop the queen side or figure it out. He goes h3, okay, stopping bishop to g4. So probably this bishop's not going to go on this diagonal unless it goes to d7, right? Bishop e6, you could play like that with the doubled pawns just to show. Let's say this happened. The way to play this for black is to try to eventually get d5 in to undouble the pawns, and at least you have the open f file. I'm sure there's some games like that in the database. However, we get a slower approach, h6. Now, at face value, it can stop anything from coming to g5. The deeper value is that the knight can route to h7, and either you can get a bishop swap on g5 or something of the sort. Also, sometimes you can go g5, rotate this knight over to g6 and f4 kind of in hippo fashion. So just some ideas of what could happen. White strikes with d4. Black moves the rook over to e8. Oh, and why is rook e8 such an important move? Because it doesn't even aim at the e-pawn, even though you would think it was played to defend the e-pawn. Well, it creates space, right? There's such little space on the 8th rank, but it created space for the bishop to retreat to f8. Now the rook's vision is not obscured to the pawn. The bishop guards h6 if you would like to play g6, and maybe in the future can fianchetto. So the Spanish is very fascinating. There's all these little minute details, but they are details. Knight to f1, you guys have probably seen this 1,000,001 times. This is how all top level chess is played at the current day even. It's crazy that they solved chess to a point back in the day. Yes, they didn't solve everything and the game has branched out. But just in the Spanish, I mean, it's amazing that they figured out this knight route and it's still played today and it's engine approved and it's just top level chess. But this is very good. It opens up the dark squared bishop. Sometimes the knight comes to g3, f5, and g4 solidifies it. Sometimes g4, knight g3, knight f5 in that order. Sometimes knight h2. I know Fabi likes knight h2. I've seen him beat Magnus many times with this. And there's rook lifts. There's everything under the sun. Bishop to b7, developing the bishop, aiming at e4 if there is ever to be a discovery, though the bishop slides back. So you see, I'm just trying to show a lot of the maneuvers. Knight to g3, trying to go to f5. This really is starting to remind me of a hippo. I don't know if that's a bad thing. Knight a5, aiming at the bishop. White would like to retain the bishop pair. Now knight c4, not an outpost, right? If the pawn comes to b3, the knight retreats, so it's not an outpost. But then c3 is softened. So we get bishop to d3, knight back to b6 anyway. Bishop to d2, getting the rooks connected once the queen comes out, and c5. This is the structure that always ends up happening in a Spanish gone right. This is how you keep the game semi-balanced. A lot of pressure in the center. Will white take? Will white not take? Okay, he pushes. The best move. Really clogging up black's bishops. Not to say white's bishops are beauties themselves, but the position is now a closed structure, making it all the more positional with the center not being blown open. So the bishop is blocked off on this diagonal. So what does he do? He goes bishop to c8, where it's a very good diagonal. Very hippopotamus-esque. We're making that a word. b3, c4. Okay, lashing out on the queen side, gaining space. And what's going to happen? Well, let's say b takes c4. Obviously, that didn't happen because it'd be a capture. But in my view, this pawn on c3 is weaker than that pawn on c4. So maybe you're going to build up on it. It's kind of also easier to defend that guy. And yeah, I think the queen side serves black better than it does white. It was still possible, but we don't get it. Bishop to f1, just super positional. And I love, okay, so positional chess used to be my weakness. I studied it a lot. These backwards bishop moves, I wish people understood. The reason you get your bishops out is because you want to castle, connect the rooks, all of that sort. But the bishop on f1 and c8, or on their starting squares rather, they are sniper rifles on both sides of the board. You can imagine in an open position where this is not, I mean, it can do some damage literally everywhere. So once you get castled and developed and everything is where it wants to be, move your bishops back to their starting squares. Much of the time, especially when the pawn structure becomes locked, for example, I think this is the best example. You slide back and then you can start sacking on h3. So a bishop that was literally nothing could sack and blow open the position on the opposite side of the board in just 2 moves. Okay, knight to h2, trying to open up stuff on the queen side, maybe trying to blow open with f4. Interesting move. Rook to c8, now threatening maybe to take, plop a knight on c4 if the pawn doesn't take, and aim at c3, which would then be a backwards pawn. White blocks off the position entirely on the queen side, and now that is actually an outpost. So now the dark squared bishop is tied down. Maybe you can get knight b2, knight d3 in the future if this bishop so chooses to move over to the king side. So this knight, though it doesn't look like anything special right now, it could be it's a very, very annoying piece. It ties down multiple of white's pieces. Queen to f3, okay, guarding c3, so now the bishop is maybe free to move. You would not want to maybe move your queen away, because then there could be tactics like bishop takes h6 and queen takes f6. So the queen is semi-tied down to guarding the knight. Just stuff to look at. We get g6, okay? The bishop guards the pawn, the queen guards the knight. Everything is safe. Also, this pawn on g6 stops anything from moving forward onto the king side. Bishop to e2, interesting move. Maybe he wants to bring his knights to e3. I'm just trying to show all these maneuvers. It's really crazy. Pawn to h4. Okay, he's had enough. He's like, I'm striking on the king side. My pieces are facing the king side. What are you going to do? Well, there's no bishop to g4. Also, though, keep in mind, this queen is almost trapped. It only has 1 square to move to, so that is pretty interesting. Knight h7. Now, if this pawn comes to h5, we own the g5 square, so that's also interesting. h5, knight g5. See, we talked about it like 20 moves, and it's coming to fruition. I wasn't even aware. I forgot that aspect. Okay, what should white do now? Well, they should trade. They should trade. As you know, from the parameters of this game, they did not. But I understand why they didn't. Let's say they trade a lot. Now, this queen's only square is still to go to e3, and this rook is going to come to f8, and there are going to be doubled pawns on e3 that is going to be very easy for black to hone in on, not to mention this pawn that's stagnated. Also, to talk about that pawn that's stagnated, you can't even create another square for the queen because then you're just screwed. You're just going to lose the game. So, understandable why he didn't go for that. He went queen e3, so nothing could come to attack the queen, and he thought maybe he was safe for a little bit. Wrong, he was. f5, blowing open the board. So you're threatening f4, that would be a fork, that would be devastating, that would be losing. The only move is queen a7 to keep everything on the board. That is not a good queen. Even if you take the poison pawn and aim at that pawn, I'm sure it's still going to be in a box. So as of now, the game is officially losing for white. He begins with f4, trying to win a piece, understandable. The knight comes to f1, and now rook to a8. This queen is so locked up. See, there's so many pieces on the board, there's no squares for the queen to safely move to. Queen b7, and can you find the move black played to make white resign? No need to go bishop c8 and let the queen come to c6. Last thing you want to do is allow it to, let's say, that'd actually be funny. Let's say like boom, boom. Oh, what did I miss? Oh, wow. I suck at chess. But let's look at this. Queen c6 and bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes knight. The queen would get out. Or you can win a rook. Probably win a rook. So the game that, or the move that put this game away is rook to e7. White resigned, not even going down the exchange, just accepting the fact that this game would make history because there was no captures, no checks, no nothing. Just a trapped queen. That put the game away. So Garcia resigned, Gligoric won. A fun game. Have you guys ever seen this game? Have you guys ever seen a game that was decisive with no trades, no checks, no nothing? That lasted almost 30 moves at the Grandmaster level. Pretty peculiar. Thank you guys for watching as always, and have a great day.